in the President under Article 53, Clause 1, which provides that the executive power of the Union shall vest in the President and it shall be exercised by him in accordance with the Constitution either directly or indirectly or through officers subordinate to him. Similarly, executive power of the state is vested in the Governor under Article 154, Clause 1. But so far as the legislative and the judicial powers are concerned, they are not vested in any authority. Under Article 50, one of the directives of the state policy, state is to take steps to separate judiciary from the executive in the public service of the state. But this has nothing to do with the vesting of powers. However, it's the constitutional duty of the judiciary to adjudicate the disputes between the citizens and the states intercede and the states and the centre in accordance with the Constitution and the law, as was observed by the Supreme Court in the case of Kartar Singh versus State of Punjab. Chief Justice Subha Rao observed in the case of Kholak Nath versus State of Punjab that the Constitution brings into existence three different constitutional entities, namely the Union, the states, and the Union territories. It creates three major instruments of power, namely the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. It demarcates their jurisdiction minutely and expects them to exercise their respective powers without overstepping their limits. They should function within the spheres allotted to them. Indira Nehru Gandhi versus Raj Narayan, in this case, Chief Justice Ray observed that in Indian Constitution, there is a separation of powers in broad sense only. A rigid separation of powers as provided under US Constitution or Australian Constitution does not apply to India. The Constitution of India does not recognize the division of powers in the strict sense. It was again observed by the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Ram Javaiya Kapoor versus State of Punjab that the Indian Constitution has not indeed recognized the doctrine of separation of powers in its absolute rigidity, but the functions of different parts or branches of the government have been sufficiently differentiated, and consequently it can be very well said that the Constitution cannot contemplate assumption by one organ or part of the state of the functions that essentially belong to another. Theory of separation of powers indeed broadly holds the field in our constitutional scheme. In case of Keshwananda Bharati versus State of Kerala, separation of powers came to be recognized as one of the basic features of Constitution and thus cannot be altered. In the case of Asif Hamid versus State of Jammu and Kashmir, Supreme Court observed that although the doctrine of separation of powers has not been recognized under the Constitution in its absolute rigidity, but the constitutional makers have meticulously defined the functions of various organs of the state. Legislature, executive, and judiciary has to function within their own spheres, demarcated under the Constitution. No organ can usurp the functions assigned to the other. Justice Bhagwati, in the case of Minerva Mills Limited versus Union of India, observed that under our Constitution, we have no rigid separation of powers as in the United States of America, but there is a broad demarcation, though having regard to the complex nature of governmental functions, certain degree of overlapping is inevitable.